we are going to start our last webinar in the series of 4 webinars on human rights and business, and you can find all webinars on the Facebook page of Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business, and also you can find all information about these webinars on the website of Polish Institute for Business and Human Rights, the web page of the project Lighthouse Keepers. And I should say that the series of webinars are organized as part of the full Summer Academy on Business and Human Rights in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And actually, this is part of a broader project, Lighthouse Keepers Business and Human Rights Cooperation Network, led by the Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business in partnership with Yaroslav Mudry National Law University, Ukraine, the Icelandic Association for Sustainable Democracy, ALDA, and the Icelandic Ombudsman for Children. And today our topic is children's rights and business. To my mind, is one of the most actually complicated topic because again, from my perspective, it's too hard to develop policies, to develop recommendations, and actually to talk about regulations related to stakeholders which are quite hard to be engaged to the equal and free conversation, to the equal and free discussion about their rights. And that's why it's very important for us today to have our great, excellent panelists, and thank you very much that you agreed to participate in this panelists in this panel discussion. And also we should say that the project benefits from a grant under the Active Citizens Regional Fund from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway through EEA grants. As I said, actually children is a very special category for human rights framework in general and for business and human rights framework as well. Children are one of the vulnerable group in societies, and for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, it's true especially. All children, whenever they live and in their circumstances, have the right to be protected and the right to be free from violence, abuse, neglect, exploitation, and etc. And corporations actually could impact children's rights in many dimensions. They could impact positively by creating good conditions and good environments, and they could impact children's rights because they are employers actually for parents and caregivers, and they could create general socio-economic conditions where companies operate. They could provide formal and informal resources for the upbringing and development of children, and so on and so forth. And all these dimensions will be discussed during our today's webinar, and we will also overview the child rights and business principles developed by UNICEF. And also we will talk about the good practices which could have different institutions which work with children's rights. And I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Gamze Erdem Turkeli, and she is the author of excellent book on children's rights and business. And I was actually very surprised and inspiring when I read this book, and I think that the author is very, very brave scholar to take this topic to discuss. So, dear Gamze, please, the floor is yours, and I would like actually to ask you what silent human rights issues should be raised when we're talking about children and business.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. Hello, thank you, Olena, for this question, but thank you to the organizers. It's a privilege to be here and to discuss a topic that is very close to my heart that I started researching 10 years ago, even a little bit more, to 11 years ago. And at that time, there was really not too much discussion. And unfortunately, we are still seeing that children are still in the sidelines when we are discussing business and human rights. And so I wrote about whether it would ever be at the center stage. I was a little bit more optimistic, but I think we have some reason to be optimistic. There's more attention to be paid. And first, I'd like to sort of ask, why do we need to focus on children's rights really specifically in business and human rights? A lot of people ask me and other scholars this question of why do we need something extra for the children? Can't we just have business and human rights more generally, and children are human beings, so they would benefit from the protections? And it's based on the children's rights and business principles that we will look at today. But there has been some thinking that has gone into this question. And the children's rights and business principles mention a number of factors. First, childhood is really special period in a human being's life, in that there's very rapid development that is taking place both physically, mentally, emotionally, and the impact that a child incurs during their childhood can have permanent or long-term effects, more so than if you have an impact after you're 20, 25 years old. If you have, let's say, lead contamination in the water when you're an infant, that can have lifelong impacts on your health. Children are therefore impacted differently and sometimes more severely than adults when you think of everyday harms. Children in most jurisdictions do not have the right to vote. They don't have a public formal voice in processes. And so when they're employed or affected by business enterprises, often they're not heard, they're not seen, they're not counted. And they're also not consulted, even as we're seeing more and more legislation around corporate due diligence, mandatory corporate due diligence. With a lot of civil society consultation, it's often the case that children are not consulted, as they're not consulted in most legislative circumstances. And another important factor is that children's rights in relation to businesses, the first thing we always think of course, child labor, because that's the most sort of publicized issue. But children can be impacted by a whole range of business activities, even if they're not employed by businesses, directly or indirectly in the supply chains. And just to show you some of the research that has gone into crystallizing these factors, this graph, and I have the sources down there, so these are not my intellectual labor. These are researchers expert in their areas. So this is from the Council for Early Childhood Development, Child Development. It's a compilation of different research that has been done. And it looks at how sensitive the brain is to learning different skills. So you see that some of these skills peak, well, most of them peak before the age of 5. And that shows how important it is to make sure the protections are there for children, because this is also a time when children have the least amount of voice. So they don't really contribute to public debates before the age of 5, and sometimes even after, but they're most sensitive in the way impacts, adverse impacts will have consequences for them. Another issue is, of course, social. So this is OECD countries, which OECD is considered a club of wealthier countries in the world. So even in this graph, you see that poverty rates for children relative to adults tend to be higher. So the blue bars are the children's sort of poverty levels, and those diamonds are the overall population. So in some countries, thankfully, children's poverty is actually lower, but in most countries that you will look at on this graph, children tend to be more at risk of poverty. It's also true in the EU, which is, again, a block of wealthier countries in the world, that 24.4% of children in 2021 were at risk of poverty and social exclusion compared to 21% of adults. Again, 44% of dependent children that were living with a single adult were at risk. And it's really important, I think, what Olena was mentioning just now. Parents of children are employed by business enterprises. And if you see single household families being at risk, such high risks of poverty, you begin to understand the more important nature of that relationship between the business and the child, even if children are not employed directly by businesses themselves. So in my book, and it's sorry for the self-promotion, but just to show that I also look at this, the reason for the distinction as childhood being a stage of rapid development, the disproportionate and different effects, invisibility, and a lack of public voice and consultation. And the second idea is that, of course, children's rights, the language of rights, and this is John Tobin's work, it really reconceptualizes the power relationships between the children, between adults and the state, and I would include business enterprises. Because the idea that a child has rights, it gives a language not just of protection, charity, or guidance, but also empowerment, that children feel empowered themselves to say, I have these rights, businesses have these responsibilities, these duties vis-a-vis my rights. And who's responsible? So traditionally, under the legal regimes that we have to govern children's rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, its optional protocols, the child is kind of in the middle of that concentric circle. The first line of action is parents, caregivers, guardians. Then you have the extended family, then you have the community and the state in which the children live. But then you also have relationships with the third states, the states that are also responsible to provide international cooperation. International organizations such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, World Health Organization, UNICEF, and others that may play a role in not only determining the norms around which children's rights are lived and implemented. And then we see the private sector. So there is a relationship that the private sector has with the child, but also with its parents, with its extended family, with its community, and with its state. And how have children's rights issues so far been addressed in the business and human rights frameworks? So there are some direct references to children's rights in different business and human rights documents that are soft law regimes so far. So the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises and the International Labor Organization's multinational enterprises declaration, they look at the abolition of child labor and the immediate elimination of the worst forms of child labor as important legal steps to take. Children, in most other circumstances, the UN Guiding Principles is one of these documents. Children are mentioned as a part of a broader group of more vulnerable people. So it mentions children, but also women, elderly, indigenous peoples, peoples with disabilities. The duties beyond child labor, they only feature in the OECD guidelines, in the soft law frameworks that are general business and human rights frameworks. And And the OECD guidelines is really important because it mentions children as parts of the society, but also as consumers, which is really important and sometimes overlooked. And there might be increased protection needs. Again, for children, for other vulnerable groups, but also in conflict situations, these soft law frameworks see that additional standards may be applicable. And let's now look at the specific children's rights frameworks. And we have two of these. So the general comment of the Committee on the Rights of the Child that was adopted in 2013, that is on states' duties in relation to business and human rights, of course, because the committee is an interstate, well, it's a body that looks at interstate conventions. But it still addresses business enterprises. And it says that duties and responsibilities to respect children's rights, in practice, they go beyond the state. And they extend to private actors, to business enterprises. And the business enterprises, in their duty to respect children's rights, they should also make sure they don't undermine a state's ability to carry out their obligations. So it means that businesses shouldn't be interfering with the protection that the state may be able to afford children. Jurisdiction, which is a very big issue in legal circles around business and human rights, certain countries have jurisdiction to regulate multinational businesses beyond their borders and so forth. So the CRC committee says the CRC, the instrument, the convention itself, does not attach territory to jurisdiction. So it means that if you're a home state of a business enterprise that works in another country, you are within your rights as a state to regulate. And in that context, the state's obligation to protect, respect, protect, and fulfill, they extend to all the children within their jurisdiction. And then we have the Children's Rights and Business Principles, which was an initiative of UNICEF, Save the Children, and UN Global Compact, which actually goes beyond looking at a very legalistic form of children's rights obligations or not. And it puts states, of course, as central duty bearers, but it also looks at businesses, other societal actors that must comply with all national laws, but also respect international standards, and mentions the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the ILO conventions on the abolition of child labor. And it also mentions the important core principles of children's rights that have been that have been recognized, let's say, the best interest of the child, non-discrimination, child participation, survival and development. And I think we'll look at this more. So just to show you that it looks at these issues at two levels. So the responsibility to respect, but what if the companies wanted to do something extra? They're not prevented from doing something positive that goes beyond respecting. And it looks at the marketplace, workplace, and the environment. So really a broad base of what the businesses might do and might be required to do. And the distinctiveness of children's rights in a substantive way is that once there is heightened duties. So a lot of these frameworks, they recognize that there are heightened duties for business enterprises to offset the risks of vulnerability and marginalization of children, in reference to the specific attributes of children's rights, so that protect best interests, evolving capacities, survival and development, but also the position of parents as immediate caregivers, as people immediately responsible for a child's well-being. And then the other component is, what if something goes wrong? That question of remedies, the importance of having child-friendly remedies, of something that will be accessible for children, age-appropriate, speedy, diligent, adapted to the needs of the child. And all of these different types of remedies should be then seen through a children's rights lens. which is something that hasn't been talked about very much. But luckily, I'm just going to recap some of the developments that have happened. And I think we're seeing more attention being paid to child-friendly remedies as well. So in the latest development, so I went through for this webinar, the third revised draft of the legally binding instrument that is being negotiated on business and human rights. So this is the latest draft that came out of the negotiations in October of this year, late October. And these are all the references to children. So children are being mentioned in the preamble within a group of more marginalized people and groups, so women, children, indigenous peoples, peoples with disabilities, people of African descent, older persons, migrants, refugees, and all other people in vulnerable situations. But that's the preamble recognizing the special needs. But then operative articles, so Article 6.4c mentions that special attention should be paid to these groups, including children, when companies are having meaningful consultation. Again, Article 7.3a mentions when legal assistance is being given to victims of business-related human rights abuses, so that's the terminology, it should be accessible and in relevant language for children as well as for adults, but also for people with disabilities. There's the possibility, of course, we don't know what the negotiations will bring, but to establish an international fund for victims. And the article that is related to that mentions that special situation and barriers, so the limitations experienced by women, children, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, etc., should be taken into account in setting up this fund, but also in setting up how it will work. And again, in conflict situations, and this is maybe the most explicit reference, that businesses, when they're operating in conflict situations, they have to pay attention to gender-based sexual violence, which of course includes violence against children, but also child soldiers, the worst forms of child labor, such as forced and hazardous child labor. And then finally, mandatory due diligence regulation. So we are seeing in Europe mostly national legislation that is trying to regulate business and human rights. There's in the Netherlands legislation on child labor. So that's the specific children's rights related law. In the UK, there is of course modern slavery legislation that includes children within its context. But it's not in general business and human rights regulation. In France, Germany, we know that laws have been adopted. In Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Sweden, Austria, there are draft bills, and some of them will address, it seems, forced and child labor. For instance, the Austria draft bill in the garment sector. The EU's draft directive on corporate sustainability due diligence, it's in its foundational document mentions the EU's children's rights responsibility regime and so forth, and that this act should be read in relation to that. But specifically, it mentions that there should be zero tolerance on child labor, but that this engagement should be a very thoughtful process that doesn't leave children in an even worse situation. And it's true also for adult workers. So this is kind of what the coming up legislation is saying and what we're faced with. So these are the general developments over the last 10 years, I would say. And happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can email me at this address.
Thank you very much. And many things became more clear personally for me. But could I ask, could we say that some business sectors or some business models are the most risky for children's rights?
Elena, thank you for this question. I think it's a wonderful question. And the answer is yes and no. I think the business practices answer is yes. So bad business practices across the board, of course, much riskier for everyone. But I think in terms of sectors, of course, we know that anecdotally, so from research that has been done, from civil society activism, we know that some sectors such as the garment sector, and we know from Rana Plaza experience and other experiences, if they're not managed well, may bring a lot of risks, especially if children are involved in the supply chain. But also the mining sector is one of the most dangerous sectors that we've seen, especially because of artisanal mining, where the shafts to mine gold and other minerals are so tiny that most of the time they prefer children to be down these mines. And so we've seen, I think, UNICEF has, following the children's rights and business principles, the UNICEF has worked on with different sectors. I think the IT sector was one of them because of all of these risks of children being exposed to online violence, bullying, as consumers of social media and so forth. So I haven't spoken to exact sectors, but of course there are these production sectors that are very heavy machinery or bad conditions, such as mining. But there are also some of the sectors that we don't think, like digital sector, that is really important. A lot of countries have been discussing regulation on healthy foods, like sugar consumption, how much sugar can you put in products. That's also because of rising diabetes rates among children. Advertising sector, for instance, if you're advertising unhealthy foods. So some of these sectors we don't think of in the first instance, but there are many sectors that might be culprits here if they're managed badly, I would say. So it's important to have good business practices across the board and good regulation by states of all sectors involved.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and actually sometimes even small details matter. For example, one air company saying ladies, gentlemen, and children, and it's also very good sign just to have in mind. That children are also passengers of this company. Thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor to our next panelists, and these panelists represent the Ombudsman for Children office in Iceland, and Sigurveig. Sorry for my pronunciation. Sigurveig Þórhallsdóttir. I practiced, but I am still should be more should be better with pronunciation. And she holds a bachelor degree in philosophy from the University of Iceland, and she was awarded a master's degree from the University of Iceland on law. And before working as legal advisor at the Office of the Ombudsman for Children, she worked for We Are the Store and Office Workers Union in Iceland, which is the largest union in Iceland. And my question is how to ensure that children's voices are heard actually, and how to engage children in decision making and ensure effective stakeholder dialogue in this regard. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And I would like to thank you for the previous presentation. It was very interesting. I will try to share my screen. Yes, and thank you for the introduction. As you stated, my name is Sigurveig Þórhallsdóttir. It's quite a difficult name to pronounce if you're not Icelandic. Yes, and I'm a legal advisor at the Office of the Ombudsman of Children here in Iceland. And I will start by explaining the role of the Ombudsman, and then I will speak about the right of every child to express their views freely in all matters concerning them, and the obligation to give their views due weight in accordance with their age and maturity. And then I will also go over the Ombudsman's consultation with children. I have been sick, so I might cough a little bit, but I think we will be fine. And I will now try to share my screen with you. Do you see my presentation? Is it full screen now?
It is PowerPoint version.
It's still PowerPoint. Okay. Then I will try something else. Is this better?
That was perfect.
This is perfect. I will try. Okay, so I think we're good. Otherwise, I will switch again over if I'm having trouble with the slides. Yes, the Ombudsman is a national independent supervisory body entrusted to guard the interests, needs, and rights of children, appointed by the Icelandic Prime Minister. The Ombudsman is independent in his work and is not subject to instruction. He initiates public discussion and points out the need for development of policies, practices, and procedures to promote children's rights and welfare. Furthermore, he takes up cases either on his own initiative or following a recent indication from others, including children, and decides whether to act on the case. One of the main focus here at the office is on children's participation in everything we do here. Yes, and the role of the Ombudsman is to guard and promote the interests, rights, and needs of children under the age of 18. The Ombudsman works to ensuring that all public authorities, including in the business sector, individual and associations, fully consider the interests, needs, and rights of children. The Ombudsman makes proposals for necessary improvements in all matters concerning children. To that end, the Ombudsman can receive any information from the authorities and has access to all institutions for children, whether publicly run or run by private parties. He can also put forward observations and instructions pointing out needs for improvement. And anyone can contact the Ombudsman, but inquiries from children are always prioritized. The Ombudsman does not deal with disputes between individuals, such as disputes between parents or legal guardians of children, nor does the Ombudsman handle cases of individual children, which according to Icelandic legislation should be dealt with by other institutions or authorities. The Ombudsman can, however, provide guidance on the available measures and which authorities individuals can turn to. In 2013, the Icelandic Parliament agreed to incorporate the Convention on the Right of the Child, along with the first two optional protocols to the Convention into domestic law. The implementation is, as many of you know, an ongoing process. And here we have the guiding principles which were mentioned here before of the CRT. Among them is Article 12 regarding the right to be heard and the obligation to give due weight to the views of the child. as I stated before, Article 12 is of fundamental importance in all work done at the Office of the Ombudsman for Children. Children have the right to express their views freely in all matters that affect them, and for their views to be taken into account in accordance with their age and maturity. The Ombudsman has found that with children participation, services can be improved and early intervention guaranteed, which leads to more cost-effective solution, better handling of public resources, and those a better success. Children's participation increases transparency and leads to more informed and careful decision-making. When children take part in policy-making and decision-making, it also strengthens children's participation in social debate and social and democratic work. Children who get the opportunity to participate learn to show initiative and to be solution-oriented. They realize that they can have an effect, which then encourages further participation. They often see opportunities for improvement and progress in their own local environment, and thus the children's participation can become a link in a long chain of development and progress in society. According to the Act on the Children's Ombudsman, the Ombudsman must actively consult with children. This includes, among other things, having a group of children to give advice on the issues that concern children in the Icelandic society. And here you have a picture of the group. The young advisors, the group consists of children between the age of 12 and 17. The group is open to all, and they work with the Ombudsman on all matters concerning children. The Ombudsman continuously works to strengthen the work of the group and to ensure that the advisor have a diverse background and experiences. And here we have an example of the work done by the Young Advisory Group. This is practical advice for everyone to have in mind when consulting with children. And here we have, for example, when calling a meeting, it is important to do it at a time that is convenient for children. It is important to be open to their ideas and opinions, show them respect, and use the information provided and inform children what will be the product of their participation. With recent amendments to the Act on the Ombudsman for Children, the Ombudsman was given the task of organizing a children's forum every other year. The purpose is to empower children and strengthen their participation in the democratic discussion on matters that concern them and to ensure their influence on policy and decision-making. The first Children's Forum was held in November 2019, and the second one in 2022, that was due to COVID. Children participating were chosen through a random selection from the National Registry and came from all over the country. By inviting children to participate in the Children's Forum by using a random selection from the National Registry, we strive to motivate a diverse group of children to participate. There were around 150-200 children from the ages of 11 and 15 that participate each year, that's every other year. And the third Children's Forum will be held in November next year. At the forum, the children are divided into groups of 5 to 6 children with a moderator who led the group through the day's discussion. During the forum, the children discuss and debate matters and topics of their own choosing. And we find it important that they choose the topics that they want to discuss. Representatives from the parliament, municipalities, NGOs, and public administration took seat at the table with the children in the second half of the discussion and take part with the children in the discussion. At the end of the forum, the proposals of the children are presented to the government, and there's a discussion in the parliament about their concluding observations. The Ombudsman is now working on presenting and promoting these proposals. And here we have some of the topics that the children discussed at the forum: equal rights, no income tax on minors, and higher salaries. For example. And if I can, I would like to show a very short video from the I'm not sure how to do it, unfortunately. I won't be able to show the video. Yes, the next slide. The office is also given the task of doing studies on the situation of certain groups of children. And that is done by expert groups that consist of children. The Ombudsman has, for example, carried out an expert group with children with alcoholic parents, children with disability, and the next will be with children that have parents that are serving time in prison. Yes, then we have another slide. There are a few things that I would like to mention regarding the children's rights and business principles. First, it is important to build awareness and knowledge of the CRBP in Iceland, both when it comes to the private sector as well as with the government. And we would like to see a child's rights impact assessment carried out regarding business activities, as well as with any proposed law, policy, or budgets allocation, which affects children's and their rights. And we find that measures need to be taken to mitigate impact on children's rights. And children and young people should be provided with the opportunity to express their views. That's everything from me. Thank you for my time.
Thank you very much. Could I ask, it's just interesting for me, this age limitations or age groups which you decide to have for advisory in committee. You have children from 12 till 17, and for participation in this children forum from 11 till 15. But how did you indicate the age of participants? Why you have these differences between advisory body and participants for children?
Thank you for this question. Regarding the forum, that is different. We won't always have the same age, children at the same age, but we have found that it is important to have similar ages at the tables together. The children have expressed that they would they think that's better to have a similar age at the table. But regarding the age the age of the children that are invited to take part in the forum, that won't always be the same age. Regarding the advisory group, I'm not sure why this age was chosen. And yes, it would be very good to have also advisory group that with the younger kids, and hopefully we will get some funding to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And about this random selection for participation in the forum, but you have some indicators for regional representation, for gender representation, or something like that. Maybe some children who are considered as more vulnerable groups should be presented for sure, or not. Children with disabilities, children from families with some problems, as you said, for expert groups. No, so it's totally randomly, or you have some indicators to
the children that are chosen through the national registry, that is completely random.
Okay.
But then we take certain measures to make sure that children that are unlikely, that it is unlikely that we will reach to get their participation. For example, children with disabilities and other groups of children.
Yeah, no, because if for example companies would like to use your experience as a good practice, it's good to know, you know, all of these details. Okay, thank you very much. And just one more question from me. You said that you would like Ombudsperson office would like to see child rights impact assessment, but maybe you have some plans or maybe already some developments with recommendations for companies how to conduct child rights impact assessment, or maybe you can share some good practices.
Unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do in this area, and the government has now started to do this in a more systematic way, which is very good. But we have yet to see how it will develop. It's in early stages. For the business sector, there has a lot of work been done regarding advertisement and marketing. Apart from that, there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay.
And we have the recommendation for the businesses regarding advertising and marketing, but it's of course in Icelandic in our websites. But
yeah, no, but yeah, maybe we can translate. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting. And I would like to give the floor to Ola Peneva, and actually Ola participated in the Summer Academy on Business and Human Rights in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and I'm happy to see her today as the panelist of today's webinar. And Ola is human rights practitioner committed to advising the business and human rights agenda in Bulgaria. And she is currently working in the ESG field at Sofia University and is establishing an NGO focused on building awareness on business and human rights in Bulgaria. So, and Ola will share with us with knowledge actually on children's rights and business principles developed by UNICEF, and what good practices Bulgaria has in this regard. Ola, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for this invitation. I do want to say that my experience in children's rights is very limited compared to my colleagues. But in preparation for this webinar, I actually realized how much we have done for 2 years. And I'm very thankful that I've been part of such a great team and with UNICEF Bulgaria, and we've achieved quite a lot. So I will share my experience and give a bit of a background just to share that. Okay. Can you see it? Can you see my screen? Great, fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic. So just before I continue, for some of you may not know much about Bulgaria, I just want to briefly say that we are situated in Southeastern Europe on the Balkan Peninsula. We have less than 7 million population, and we are the fastest shrinking nation in the world. Having said that, since April 2021, we've had 3 elections for parliamentary elections, and we haven't been able to form a stable government. Added to this, when this whole experience that I was part of was happening, we had COVID, which started in March 2020. And also for those of you who have worked in UNICEF or the UN system, we also started our process for the new country program, which is a very, very enormous job. So it started September 2021, and also my solidarity goes to the Ukrainian people. And unfortunately, in February 22, the war in Ukraine started, and these are just really a lot of circumstances, a lot of really big factors that influenced our work on developing and advancing the child's rights agenda. So when I started the role in UNICEF, I was part of the team Business for Results. It was 2 of us, but we've had a really great support, global support, because we started working on this program. We had the training 2020, and our support from the country rep and deputy rep was very, very, very important. Having said that, we had 2 people that are consultants, myself, and I was working with the team inside, trying to help them to understand what is the Business for Results initiative. And I think it was difficult for all of us, but essentially Business for Results is a really great program or initiative that I really, really like, and I think it has a lot of potential. It's about creating shared value partnerships, working with business, engaging in multi-stakeholder platforms, and really achieving results for children through co-creation and leveraging resources. So when I started, there were 3 main developments that were really foundational for my work. This was conducted by my colleague, Professor Marina Stefanova, who I continue to work with. She's a corporate and sustainability specialist in Bulgaria. So she has conducted the CSR mapping, which was very important because it covered more than 500 initiatives that businesses were working on to improve lives of children. The focus they were all SDG aligned, with SDG 1, SDG 3, and SDG 4, so poverty, health, and education. The second foundational document, or it wasn't a document, but an action, was the establishment of the Advisory Council on Business and Child's Rights. I'll just refer to the Advisory Council. This was the example of a multi-stakeholder platform when the business associations, different business associations were part of it. The Industrial Association, the Stock Exchange, we've had bilateral organizations, associations, like American Chambers, the Swiss Chamber, and so on. We've had a representative from the UN Global Compact, the Bulgarian network. We also had representative from Sofia University, and very importantly, we also had representative from the National Network on Children, which represented more than 140 NGOs in Bulgaria working in the area of child's rights and child well-being. The whole idea behind the advisory council was to find ways of how to better really improve the child's rights agenda and implement the child's rights business principles. And the third document, which I'm just going to refer to as situational analysis because it's a mouthful, was the first such report conducted for 3 months, March 2020, May 2020, which was the first report that actually assessed the impact of the business sector on children's rights in Bulgaria. And I hope you will receive a copy of it, but it is a document that is actually really, how to say, to me, this was not groundbreaking, but it included very, very important information. And it really showed the fact that business was not ready, or business wasn't considering children, the impact on children through their work. Children were always were seen as a really good cause to support, but not to be included as part of the solution. There is this lack of understanding how we can impact children, and also from children's perspective, especially the youth, there seemed to be a lot of gap between why business is not including us. And as we heard earlier, the issue of participation is quite big, not only with children, but also with young people. One of the findings that the situational analysis found that we need to improve awareness on the children's rights business principles. And I think this was our main focus then on developing this business for results journey. The business for results journey was a very interesting journey, and I hope it continues for my colleagues around the world. But we had a lot of information, we had a lot of knowledge and expertise, and having established this multi-stakeholder platform through the business associations and the NGOs, we wanted to share this information. We wanted for businesses more and more know about the results from the CITAN, the business CITAN. We wanted to make some recommendations and to build on that to make sure that there is some recognition. And most importantly, for the first time, we had the business ready to listen, and they were they were willing. The only probably difference or the main issue was that each association had their own agenda. And when I say that, some of them wanted to introduce the results of the CITAN to the small and medium enterprises. Some wanted to focus on the rule of law. Some of them wanted to focus on family-friendly policies. And while these were common grounds, for us at UNICEF, the most important thing was what are our program priorities and how we're going to meet those priorities to ensure that we achieve those results for children. So the second really important part of the business for results journey was also the capacity building and really helping businesses to improve their knowledge about the business and rights principles, and also children's rights principles, and also about children's rights agenda. I want to mention two good examples. The first one is what exactly my colleagues managed to implement. One thing I want to say is that Business for Results is a really good initiative, but colleagues who work on the ground had to make a very big shift to understand that from one point of view, now we're starting to look at business not as philanthropic, but looking at business as a partner and as a solution. It's to look from the beginning as how you can work together with business. And this platform, Podkrepime, was one of a really good example, because whilst the platform, this platform is for children who have learning disabilities or have special needs, and during COVID they needed even more support because of the online learning. So this platform allowed them to access those resources with the help of their teachers. So this was a good example where we saw the business helping with establishing this platform. And although there was a financial aspect, there was a non-financial engagement as well, because they offered a lot of training on how to use the platform, and this would actually improve the whole experience for everyone. The second probably in really good example, not probably, but a really good example is from our colleagues from the National Network on Children, the Child-Friendly Company Label. So the role of UNICEF in this particular case is just as a technical expert. This whole project is led by the National Network for Children, but it is a really good example of how you can apply the children's rights principles. And what they've done is there is an opportunity if a company submits. So currently there are 4 companies that have such child-friendly certificate. You show your interest that you want to receive such certificate, and then you go through a self-assessment process, which is 47 questions. Then you get audited by their consultants. After the audit, what happens is you have some recommendations if needed, make the following, the required changes, and then you may be awarded a certificate, but this will happen only by an independent body, which is obviously a board that's selected by the network. And then this certificate is awarded for, is given for 3 years. And throughout these 3 years, there is a monitoring process. So this is a really good example to see how you can actually work with business to advance the child's rights agenda and to apply the children's rights business principles. Just before I finish, some lessons learned. As you probably heard, I'm very big supporter of the Business for Results initiative, because I do believe that once there is, business can be part of the solution to a point, and we can work with business on a non-financial engagement, because businesses need to understand from organizations like UNICEF or NGOs how to better improve those practices. But my major concern in what I've learned is that when we started having, it is really important in terms of capacity, how you're going to start such a big initiative and how you're going to invest in people to stay in this initiative. Because for our experience in Bulgaria, the 2 people that were really focused and working on this are no longer there. So I really hope that my colleagues in other regions are continuing to do this. The second thing that I've learned was that businesses want to do something today. They're very quick, they're very efficient. And often in our meetings, they were saying, what do you want? How can we help? From a different perspective, an organization like UNICEF, we were a bit slow, or very slow in some ways, very bureaucratic. And what was happening was we couldn't meet. And I think it's very important to really have a common ground, to establish common ground, and to build on that, and to think more like a long term. But whilst businesses will have to understand that we are a little bit slow, we also can learn from business to become a bit more efficient, to become more quicker, because I think we were able to, we could have done better things. But of course, as I started from the beginning, we were acting in a very crisis, constantly dealing with crisis over another unstable political system. And when I look back now, I'm still saying I'm sharing a really good practice. I know there's a lot of documents and a lot of expertise, and I hope that moving forwards, other people or even we in Bulgaria can build on what we've achieved and keep growing. That's from me, Olena. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I opened this this website, Child BG, and I was trying to find this list of questions, but I didn't actually. It's this list of questions is not in open access, right?
I do have the list of questions, but I will ask if it's open to the public in terms of, I'm not really sure who, do they give it only to the companies, but if do, I will share it so you can share with everyone.
No, yeah, but I'm just wondering that, no, actually, if this certificate is something which is proud for companies, I don't think that the list of questions should be not in open access, not just for understanding for what companies could receive this certificate. And actually, for me personally, it's very interesting. Some examples of these questions. So what are about, and are these questions related somehow to business and human rights, or mostly corporate social responsibility?
Olena, thank you. Very good question. I was trying to see if I have it, but
no, the general idea. I understand that the list of questions could be very specific, but the general idea of this self-assessment, are we doing something good for children, or are we assessing risks which we have in our operations for children, right? No, so yeah. Just as general idea.
Yeah, look, I think that it's my I haven't looked at the questions too much because I was looking for good examples, and I was really impressed because I was worried that this is not continuing this initiative. I heard that it is continuing, and actually it may be, I think they've got the rights to work outside Bulgaria in Europe. So this means that there is a lot of value. I do know that the structure is following the workplace, the children's principles, looking at the workplace, working at the market, looking at the community. So as I'm saying, it is structured around this, but how it is, as you said, I think if it's okay for companies to have this and to want to join this, to have this certificate, perhaps the question should be on the website. I can share them, of course, but also give the feedback because I think it's a great initiative, and I hope it will continue in the right direction.
Yes, thank you very much. No, actually, my concern is that what I see from the experience of UNICEF and, for example, UN Women or some other agencies, that as you said, that business could come and ask, what do you need, how we can we help, and actually the same questions some large companies asked me, for example, in April or in March this year, when they didn't want to talk about how to assess human rights risks in conflict affected area, but they want to show something good in their practices. Now, I mean that in many cases it's much more easier for businesses just to do something good without assessing their own operations. So so my question from your experience, actually, I don't want to ask directly about UNICEF or concrete UN agencies, but just your feeling. Do we have the risk, or what should be changed in the practices of international organizations when they cooperate with companies, with businesses, and want to implement some good initiatives? And you shared very good examples of very good initiatives, but still I have, as business and human rights person, I have very complicated feeling about these initiatives, because I don't see if these companies were assessed on children and children rights risks, you know. So maybe this component should be more strong in the practices of international organizations. What do you think? It's just my feeling. Maybe I'm wrong.
Look, I agree. Just to confirm, what you're saying is that we need to. So if we work with one-on-one business, it is very difficult because we can just have one business and try to change practices. Or when you're working on a multi-stakeholder level, we are trying to build awareness, and this was the major finding. We want them to understand that we're not talking only about CSR and good causes, that it is time to move away from CSR good cause, and we need to be transparent and look at what are the negative impacts. And this is where the issue is. Nobody wants to talk about a negative impact, and this is why the findings are not surprising. But what I was saying, through this multi-stakeholder platform, it's really helpful because I found readiness in companies that were really willing to listen. And if we just kept going with the same messages, if we kept using all the information, I think it's consistent message in telling them it is time for you to move away from feel-good causes. It is time to show that, you know, even if you're doing negative, if you have a negative impact, you can address it through the due diligence. And I think this is all ultimately we need to focus on and help them to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this response. Thank you very much. And actually, my next question to all our speakers, you know that actually today in broad understanding, there are a lot of conversations about forthcoming EU regulations on corporate sustainability due diligence. And actually, do you expect positive changes in the context of this forthcoming EU regulation in regard of children's rights, and maybe you take in mind these forthcoming regulations related to your personal professional perspective to work on children's rights and business, or actually you are quite skeptical about this regulation because it doesn't have a special focus on children's rights. So I would be thankful for any of your reflections about these forthcoming regulations related in the context of children's rights and business. So please, maybe.
Can I start maybe?
Yeah, please, of course.
Yes, I would have liked to have seen a special discussion about children. Apart from that, I do hope there will be a positive change, at least hopes bound with increased awareness of the responsibility of the corporations and in relation to human rights and children's rights.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, actually, it's a good tool to increase attention of companies to these issues. Thank you. Degamze, maybe your thoughts about this issue.
I think there will be some movement of the needle on the traditional issues, right? Children's rights in relation to the abolition of the worst and hazardous forms of child labor, which has been in the EU policy anyhow from before, but now it will be implemented through mandatory due diligence. And I think so there will be much more attention paid to children's rights in relation to labor situations in the supply chains. I think it will, of course, if the contractual clauses as the EU, the draft right now requires, will be put into contracts with suppliers through the supply chains. And it's a little bit of a question. It seems like the value chains have been scrapped to prioritize direct relationships, so that there might be limitations, unfortunately. Some of the issues will be, I think, clarified and become more focused, but I'm afraid in many other situations, children will not receive special attention beyond child labor issues or conflict situations. So that's because they're not specifically targeted in this regulation, in the operative part of the regulation. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think any progress is good, but I think we need to think of children as being integral members of our societies and not just something to think about if we see really bad child labor situations. So I think there's still a lot more that could have been done in this regulation, and it's a missed opportunity in a sense.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ola. What do you think?
Look, I'm a bit skeptical in a way, just because in Bulgaria, this whole concept of due diligence is just very, very far. And I think for the situation here, maybe through the ESG, through this lens of talking about social impact, and maybe looking at all these companies that are doing good and including children, maybe we can, people that are acting here, maybe we can do something. But as you know, I've shared with you, we're not that many. So we're going to try to find ways. But yes, unfortunately, I'm a bit more skeptical. And I'm afraid that if we push too hard, it might be a tick box exercise. It will not address and include children's rights. It will be just, okay, we now have child labor, tick. Oh, now we have modern slavery, tick. And I'm afraid that we need to be a bit more cautious how we're going to do it.
Actually, could you share with us actually this question to all speakers as well, the role of civil society organizations? And because I from Ukrainian perspective, I have a feeling that actually civil society organizations are maybe the only actors who really understand children's rights and who actually familiar with needs of children, vulnerable children, and so on. So maybe could you recommend to companies which really want to start this children rights impact assessment on the company's level, to start with conversation with civil society organizations, or what actually the first step should be done for beginners of these efforts?
Can I just give a quick example on something that when in February, 24th of February, the war started, I was involved in a platform which was initiated by the business community, the tech community in Bulgaria before BG4UA. And the business community was trying to evacuate refugees, to help them to come to Bulgaria. It was a very interesting way of seeing how the business is trying to find the solution. And at one point of time, they realized they really needed the knowledge and expertise of the civil society. So we had the money of the business and the technical knowledge. We needed this NGO experience, the whole civil society sector who knew what was going on, what are the needs, short-term, mid-term, long-term, and then we also needed the government. So in what you're asking, I think it is very important to have everyone involved, especially for more sustainable and lasting solutions. So yes, if a company comes, and especially if it's a specific online safety, bullying, everything, we need not to include only the civil society, business and civil society, and then how we can make sure that this is a sustainable solution, not a short term, we're just going to fix it now and then we're not going to resolve it long term. So this is why I like this whole approach, and hopefully I answered the question, but yes, bringing everyone together, not working in isolation anymore. I think we can't afford that.
Thank you. Maybe our other panelists, could you share your thoughts about actually what's the first step you could recommend to do for companies which are just at the very beginning of the conversation about children's rights on the company level, and could you recommend to start this work with conversation of civil society organizations? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. If I understand your question right, to start to be aware of children's rights, that they have independent rights, that companies have responsibility regarding them, and what I find is positive about the business principles is that they focus on more than just the fundamental, like child labor. It takes quite a broad approach to the connection between children's rights and the practices of businesses. So what we need, what I find here nicely, what we need is the awareness that companies do need to consider their effects on children, and actually I'm afraid that here we have that people, that the companies are not aware of the connection with I'm not sure if I try to say fundamental or the core, like child labor in the I can't find the words, in the supply chain. So basic things like that we are lacking, which is extremely important. And what I think is the fundamental is the awareness in the society about the impact. And we see it here, there's a lot going on about sustainability and companies' responsibility in that regard. We need to have the same awareness regarding children's rights and the effect on children.
Thank
I hope
you.
I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
And maybe very shortly, and I put it in the chat, but when the Children's Rights and Business Principles first came out, UNICEF started this whole work towards implementation, and I think they have a really good guidelines. So it follows the UN guiding principles, which I sometimes am critical of for not going as far as they should have, but at least at the heart of it is the establishment of a policy commitment to business and human rights, but also to children's rights. And then there are some guidelines where I've shared the link, but UNICEF put together some guidelines about what do you look for in a children's rights impact assessment, because you can make it a part of your general human rights impact assessment, or you can make it a separate impact assessment for children. So I think that the first idea is really to have a policy commitment where you commit to children's rights within your business model and your work through your suppliers, but all the way down and up your value chains. And then you really assess your impact. And it's something that businesses are very used to doing. So they do a lot of risk and impact assessments financially and for other reasons. So this is just another exercise, but it's human rights focused, children's rights focused. And so there are some tools out there that nationally or internationally have been made available. So I think there's a good basis to start. And I think the civil society is really key in that, because that's where the conversations first start. And it often happens because civil society members or communities see violations happen. So they see a bad situation, they want to fix it, and they're trying to go talk to policymakers, but they also want to talk to businesses, because the ideal situation is you prevent, right? So that it doesn't happen in the first place. So the only way we can prevent it is by being aware of it, as I think Olya was saying, that awareness is really important, but also integrating it in our business practices, in everyday business practices, in an effective way. So I think if they want to start, there's a lot out there that they can make use of.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, we can finish on this good point. And I would like to thank to all our panelists, great panelists. Thank you very much that you shared with us your experience, your thoughts, your knowledge, and good practices and bad practices. And also thank you very much to all our participants, and it was the final webinar of our series of webinars, and I just want to remind that you can find all webinars. And thank you very much, Alexandra, for this reminding in the chat. And thank you very much to all team which supported all these webinars and all Summer Academy School. Thank you, and I hope that we will meet again next year. So thank you very much, and bye.